Good morning, everyone. I'm coming to you from Calgary and the beautiful Treaty 7 lands of Mohkinstsis that's been stewarded by hundreds of generations of Blackfoot and Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda and Métis, and I get to work in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about this pretty complex project that we did. So I'm going to share my screen. And so I am a lighting video uh, projection, whatever you want to call it, mixed reality set, and sometimes costume designer. My work has included an enormous amount of technology from the days when it was actually very difficult to do to now when it's still really difficult to do, but is becoming more and more of a fluid process. Barry the Wren, I'm just going to skip through. These are some images from my history. Barry the Wren was a project that continues to live. It was started here at the University of Calgary with my collaborator, Neil Christensen, and he and I got together about 2 years ago, and we started talking about ways that we could use emerging technology, which is what I'm here at the university looking at, ways that we could use emerging technology to tell a really compelling story while also playing with the properties that these technologies give us, these ephemeral, time shifting, and other worldly kinds of spaces that we get to inhabit when we go into VR or when we add the layer of AR on top. What I was really interested in, or he was really interested in shifting notions of reality. And so through that, we also developed this term carbon reality in order to try to differentiate between augmented reality, virtual reality, and what we would call real reality, but everything's a reality. So we created a performance piece where it was a one-on-one. It is, because it continues to exist. There we go. This is our little sizzle reel.
I suppose you want to hear the story.
So what we did was we took a Vive Pro headset and we were playing around and we were exploring with what it was capable of, and what it could give us to tell our particular story. And we wanted to tell, or what I brought to the table was the Donnelly story. And so the true story of the massacre of the Donnelly family, that I've worked on several productions of, including a production where we found the wife of one of the survivors. He ended up becoming the most successful member of the family, and they lived their lives in the shadows of the vigilantes who murdered the family. And in this story, and the Donnelly legend has been told so many times in Canadian theater and in terrible CBC movies and all kinds of things. from there, the female perspective has never been spoken about. And so we also decided that VR gave us a really interesting access point to the voice, and if we looked at ways that we could integrate both a virtual world, a performance world, and this story that is ultimately a ghost story, um, there was really rich territory there for us. And so what we started to play with, and it was all developed in a devised method, meaning that we used our performer. We had two women work with us, Val Planche and Val Campbell, who ended up performing the piece, who you saw in that video there. And we worked with what we knew the technology was capable of, and what our plan was to pick several objects that we would then build the story from. And that came from the fact that Annie Donnelly, when she died, had her husband exhumed from the family crypt and brought 100 kilometers away to London, Ontario, where they had no connections, and they are entombed in a steel casket. And it was her final act of trying to save him. Right? That was my interpretation of it. The other part of that was that there are no artifacts of her, and I've done deep research. There's no photo. I have a document with her signature on it, but there's nothing of her. And so that fed our imagination of what was going to be in this space, and that we would devise the story through objects. And part of that was tied to what we wanted to do with the technology, which you can see her handing a Vive tracker here. What we wanted to do was actually create photogrammetry, the 3D scans of real objects that she would tell the story through, that we would develop the story through, and that would enter into interaction with the single participant in the room. There were several other layers to that. So these are some of our objects here that we scanned, that we brought into VR, that we then worked with dramaturgs and the performer and me and Neil as the lead technologist, but the co-collaborator as well. And we brought all these objects into VR, but we created it outside of VR until our technology was ready. And we had a 4-month delay because we were actually waiting for the technology to catch up a little bit to what we wanted to do. And so your experience is entering into a blank theatrical space with nothing in it. You're put into the headset. I then sort of do all the instructions and fix your pupillary distance and all of that stuff. And then the performance begins, and the performer enters into the space with you while her world is built within VR. And we were playing with many real live sounds that she was creating. So sounds of dresses and teapots clinking and tea pouring, while we were also engaging you in VR with those objects. And it was all also about exploring the real-time rendering capabilities of Unity, which is what was driving this, Unity and Steam VR. And so uh, the approach to it was very theatrical within VR. Like, we went through what I would call a traditional tech process, except I had to be in VR for hours, relighting things, but telling Neil where to move the lights on objects. And we did a lot of discovery about how the audience was going to be able to interact with the objects, and what thematically and story wise it was giving us, just from being able to relight. And when you went into VR, it was black, and then slowly, essentially, her grave emerges, and she enters the room, and she begins to interact with you, and she welcomes you to her grave. She introduces the first object, and while all of this is happening, you can see now sort of a workshop photo of it. While all of this is happening, the carbon objects plus more are being brought into the room silently by our ninja technicians. And of those objects too, there are moments in the piece where we were also playing with proprioception, with the idea of what's real. At no point do you see her. So she remains, while you're in VR, she remains just a voice and a physical presence. And she introduces the virtual objects. She tells the story. She then takes the virtual objects away from you so that we can switch them. We use a lot of like sleight of hand and magician style tricks to distract the audience so that they looked one way. We played with sound both in the headsets and in the room itself in order to create space, to create mood, and to create distractions so that we could do the things like do the hard switch from the teapot to the candelabra. Um, we also then played with things like the objects in VR where there are slides back, there was a candelabra. The candelabra here ultimately also catches on fire in your hands. So we wanted to play too with what was in VR that you couldn't do in the theater. You can't put a candelabra in an audience's hands and set it on fire. It's just, we can't do it, but we can in VR. And that allowed us access to just some really beautiful and really powerful moments in the storytelling, because though the actor doesn't see the candelabra catch on fire, it's actually her cue, her trigger to have to tell the story of the massacre. It's the fire that changes things, and so we worked, and yet the performer doesn't see it, right? So we had to adjust our ways of working to, in order to create it, and to so that the performer knew what was going on as well. But they and what was interesting was that we didn't tell the audience they couldn't explore, but very few people explored. And about half of our audience members were experienced in VR, had been in VR or AR before, and yet they didn't explore. And we had hidden little things in the virtual world. We had removed all gamification, so you didn't have to trigger anything. The performer was guiding you through the story, but you did have agency to move around. And one person moved around, and it was the person that we figured was going to. Um, and so then this interplay between the carbon objects and the virtual objects, in order for her to slowly, essentially, trust the participants. So that in terms of Annie trusting the participants, so that by the time we get to the to close to the end of the story, she is ready, and yes, that's a real human bone. She is ready to reveal herself, and so technologically, so the Vive Pro headsets, the cameras, the pass-through cameras that are in them that allow you to do AR, are not of a very high resolution. And so what we decided was that rather than try to ignore it or just let it be, we would actually embrace it. And we added several filters to give her the quality of a daguerreotype photo, which is the very first image that we are introduced to and the very first object with the wedding portrait. And so to use what the technology had to give us at this point in time, to then allow it to affect the image that we were bringing forward. And this was the stage too, where you finally see her, you're finally reconnected with a sense of yourself, because you can see your hands through the pass-through camera. So it's seeing everything, and you can now see that the room has been altered, that we've added objects to it that you experienced in VR. So we wanted to remain still in this liminal space of, is it real? Is it not real? Is she here? I can feel her. I can see her, but she's ghostly. She's. We wanted to keep everyone off kilter, because what I think is the big payoff is the moment where she then removes the headset from the participant. And there's a final exchange between her and the participants where she thanks you for listening, and she then hands you a very, very real apple that's yours. You can eat it, and we give people a couple of minutes in the room to then explore the carbon objects to restore themselves. Almost everyone that she removed the headset from was in tears by the end of it, which is a testament to her performance, and I think speaks to this deep intimacy and transportative quality of VR and AR and what we have access to in a performative sense. And then she leaves the room. You then get your time in the room, and we had one further step too, where we had taken a picture of everyone at the beginning because this was a research project and we needed to measure people's pupils. During all of this show, while we're running the sound and the light and the VR cues, we're also photoshopping you into a portrait of her, so it looks like you're now very similar to the wedding portrait that you saw at the beginning. It looks like you had this moment with her, posed for a photograph that didn't actually exist in the way, and there's me with Annie, in the way that there are no photographs of her, and she is a spirit. And that, very quickly, very briefly, is what we did. Oh, and this is one of our dramaturgs. That was really interesting. In another scenario, I would talk about how we dramaturged in VR because it was a familiar but very different process, and it required building of some interesting new tools and skills to deal with the dramaturgy of this.